They say midnight prayers rise straight to heaven, but she says that's not always true. According to her, sometimes your prayer never even leaves the room. Sometimes something else is waiting for it, listening for it, reaching for it before it can rise. Her voice didn't shake when she said this. It was calm, almost too calm, like someone remembering a nightmare that didn't scare them anymore because they survived it. Her name isn't important. What she used to be is an ex-witch, a woman who walked deeper into the occult than most people ever realize exists. A woman who followed rules and rituals most believers have never heard of. A woman who says witches don't always attack people physically, or mentally, or even emotionally. She says the real battle is spiritual, and it happens quietly. Right when you think you're closest to God, she remembers the first time she saw someone's midnight prayer fail. She wasn't trying to stop it, not that night. She was only watching. She was in her mentor's house, a small room filled with the smell of herbs and the smoke of a single black candle. The window was open, letting the midnight wind carry strange sounds through the darkness. Her mentor moved slowly, deliberately, as if listening to something she couldn't hear. Then her mentor whispered, "Someone is praying," and she won't be heard tonight. Elara, the name we'll use for her, froze. "How do you know?" she whispered back. Her mentor didn't look up. She simply traced a symbol onto the table with her fingertip. A curved mark Elara had seen before but never understood. The flame of the black candle flickered sharply, as if hit by invisible breath. And in that moment, Elara felt it. A sudden shift in the air. A heaviness. A pressure, as if the atmosphere had changed its mind. Her mentor finally spoke. "Because we blocked her." Without touching her. Elara didn't understand then. She didn't know about the 4 laws. She thought witchcraft was about rituals and chants and candles and crystals. She didn't know that the real power wasn't in the tools, but in the laws witches believed governed the unseen world. It wasn't until years later, after she was fully initiated, after she had crossed lines she never imagined crossing, that she learned the truth. Witches don't just perform rituals. They follow spiritual laws, laws that act like invisible rules, predictable, repeatable, dependable, laws that could lift or destroy spiritual energy, just like gravity moves everything in the physical world. And according to her, 4 of those laws were used for one purpose: to block midnight prayers, to intercept the connection, to disturb the focus, to redirect the outcome, to replace the answer. She didn't want to believe it at first. She didn't want to accept that people crying at 12 CAUD AM, begging for breakthrough, pleading for healing, fighting for their families, never realized that something unseen was standing between them and their prayer. But once she saw it, once she had used the laws herself, she couldn't unsee it. She remembers one night in particular. She was sitting alone, a single candle burning on the floor, the room silent except for the faint hum of night insects outside. She wasn't praying. She wasn't allowed to pray in the way Christians pray, but she was focusing, listening, tuning her mind to the spiritual atmosphere around her. That's when she felt it, a sudden rising force, like heat lifting from the ground, like a vibration moving upward. Someone somewhere was praying passionately. Someone was crying out from the deepest part of their heart. Elara felt it like a ripple through her chest. But then something else happened. She felt a second force, darker, colder, sliding over the first one. And then the prayer simply dissolved, vanished, like smoke blown out before it becomes a flame. She didn't block it herself. She didn't have to. One of the laws had already done it. She sat there in the dim light, breath caught in her throat, realizing for the first time that prayers weren't just answered or unanswered. They could be interrupted, intercepted, stopped. And later, much later, after she left witchcraft behind and began telling her story, she finally explained what she had learned. Witches don't overpower prayers. They weaken the atmosphere around the person praying. They confuse the intention before it leaves the mind. They destabilize the spiritual rhythm that holds the prayer together. And at the end, they substitute the outcome. She says she watched it happen hundreds of times. People fighting for their lives in prayer, never knowing something was fighting against them in silence. And the most frightening part? Witches don't even need to know you personally to block your midnight prayer. They only need to follow the 4 spiritual laws. And she remembers exactly how each law works. But before she explains them, she says one thing clearly. Your prayer didn't fail because you were weak. It failed because something else was working, right when you didn't know it. She says the first spiritual law witches use isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't involve chanting or candles or sacrifice. It happens long before that, long before midnight, long before you speak your first word in prayer. She calls it the law of intention hijacking, not because witches control your thoughts, but because they know exactly how to interrupt them. She learned this law in one of the smallest, quietest rooms she has ever been in, a room with no windows, a room with nothing but a table, a wooden chair, and a single lantern that made the shadows sway like something alive. Her mentor sat across from her, tracing invisible shapes on the table with her finger. "Why do you think prayers rise?" she asked. Ilara didn't answer. She didn't know. Her mentor didn't wait. They rise because intention forms the thread. Without intention, the prayer is only words. Then she tapped the table, once, and threads can be cut. Ilara didn't understand what she meant, not at first. But the mentor explained the law in a way that chilled her. Every prayer begins as intention, not a thought, not a sentence. But the moment a person quietly decides, "I'm going to pray," that moment, that spark, is the most fragile part of prayer, and witches know it. They know that intention is energy in its softest state, not yet shaped, not yet protected, not yet strengthened by faith or focus. They don't destroy it. They disturb it. A slight emotional shift, a sudden wave of confusion, an unexpected memory, a strange heaviness in the chest, a tiny whisper of fear, a random distraction. Nothing dramatic, because dramatic would be too obvious. Her mentor told her, if you can twist the intention before it becomes prayer, the prayer never arrives complete. It arrives broken, and broken prayers don't survive the night. She didn't believe it until she saw it work. One night, her mentor sent her to observe a woman who prayed at 12:15, every night without fail. A woman strong in faith, firm in routine. Someone whose prayers, according to witches, burned bright in the spiritual realm. Ilara sat in the dark corner of her room listening, not with her ears but with her sensitivity. She could feel the woman preparing to pray the same way a sailor feels the ocean shift before a storm. The woman's intention rose like a small, steady flame. Ilara felt it. Then her mentor acted. She didn't chant. She didn't perform a ritual. She didn't lift a single tool. She simply whispered a single word. A word Ilara didn't understand. The effect was instant. The woman's intention flickered. Not vanished, flickered. Like a candle touched by breath, the woman suddenly felt tired. Her mind wandered. She sat down, and instead of praying, she started scrolling through her phone, a 2-minute interruption. Nothing more. But the intention had already dissolved, and the prayer never happened. Ilara's voice softens when she recalls that night. It shocked me, because the woman wasn't weak. She wasn't distracted. She wasn't faithless. Her intention was hijacked before she even knew she needed to protect it. She describes intention as a doorway. The first spiritual law doesn't close the door. It just nudges it off its hinges. So anything that enters afterward comes in crooked, confused, distorted. According to witches, if your intention is disturbed, your prayer loses direction. It loses volume. It loses force. It becomes a whisper, trying to compete with thunder. And that whisper rarely reaches heaven. Ilara says the saddest part is this. Most believers think their prayer was weak. No, their intention was attacked before the prayer was even born. She saw this hundreds of times. People who tried to pray for deliverance, for their children, for healing, for clarity, for a breakthrough, but couldn't focus, couldn't settle, couldn't find the strength to start. Not because they didn't want to, but because the moment they decided to pray, something unseen took their hand off the door. Something subtle. Something small. Something that looked like normal life. But Ilara says nothing is normal at midnight. Nothing. She says that's why so many believers feel a sudden wave of sleepiness. Exactly when they kneel to pray. Why their chest becomes heavy the moment they close their eyes. Why anger rises from nowhere. Why tears start for no reason. Why anxieties flood the mind. Why memories they had forgotten suddenly come alive. Why their phone rings. Why someone texts. Why their stomach aches. Why the dog barks. Why the room feels hotter. Why the air feels colder. These are not coincidences, she says. These are not random. These are not just life. These are patterns. Repeating patterns, predictable patterns. Because witches don't block the prayer. They block the intention. They go after the first spark, the fragile beginning, the quiet moment before the words form. Because once the intention is weakened, once it's cut, confused, interrupted, the prayer becomes hollow, and hollow prayers don't reach anywhere. Ilara ends the explanation with one line that stays with you. Every prayer you lost before it started was stolen by this law. She says the second spiritual law is the one believers feel the most, but recognize the least, not because it's complicated, and not because it's hidden, but because it feels like something we naturally blame on ourselves. She calls it the law of atmosphere control. And according to her, this is the law that does not touch your mind. It touches the air around you. She remembers the night she first felt it. She wasn't praying. She wasn't watching anyone else pray. She was sitting alone in her room, lights off, the moon pouring pale light through the window. Her mentor entered without knocking. She always did, carrying nothing but a very small clay bowl in her hand. She placed the bowl on the floor, sat opposite Ilara, and whispered, "Tell me what the room feels like." Ilara frowned. Nothing had changed. No candles, no herbs, no rituals. "It feels normal," she said. Her mentor smiled, a slow, unsettling smile. "That's because you're still thinking physically." Then she did something Ilara never forgot. She passed her open palm slowly through the air. Nothing visual happened. No lights, no sound, no smell. But the air changed. Not temperature, texture. The room suddenly felt thicker, as though humidity had appeared out of nowhere. The light from the moon dulled. The shadows grew heavier, and a faint pressure settled on Ilara's chest, like someone had rested a hand there without touching her. She gasped, because it wasn't fear. It wasn't emotion. It was atmosphere. Her mentor leaned forward. Before a believer speaks, before they declare anything, before they call on God, we control the room. Ilara didn't understand, not yet. So her mentor stood up, walked to the open window, and whispered something into the night. The air changed again. Worse this time. Thicker. Heavier. So dense that Ilara felt her heartbeat slow, like something was dampening her spirit. That's when her mentor explained, "When the atmosphere is heavy, prayer becomes heavy. When the room is quiet, prayer becomes quiet. When the energy is low, prayer loses its climb." She paused, letting the silence stretch like a rope. Atmosphere is the soil. If we poison it, the seed cannot grow. Ilara didn't speak. She couldn't. She felt as if something invisible was pressing her into her chair, pulling at her breath, making even the simplest thought feel exhausting. Her mentor walked back to her and said the line that made her understand the law forever. "Witches don't stop the prayer. We suffocate the air it tries to rise through. This is why," she says, "so many believers feel tired exactly at midnight. Not because they lack discipline, not because their bodies are weak, but because the spiritual atmosphere around them is being manipulated." She described it as an energy fog, an unseen substance that settles on rooms, homes, beds, even the hallways outside a believer's door. And the signs are always the same. A sudden heaviness in the chest, sleepiness that hits like a wave, a pressure on the forehead, a quiet ringing in the ears. The air feels thicker. The room feels darker. A sense of spiritual numbness. The sudden urge to lie down just for a moment. A strange silence that feels unnatural. "These are not coincidences," she says. "These are atmospheric manipulations." She witnessed witches shift atmospheres with a phrase whispered at the right second, a flame blown in a specific direction, a thought sent intentionally, a ritual performed miles away, a vibration released during moon cycles, a sigil buried near someone's home, a candle lit at the exact time a believer starts praying. She says the scariest thing is this. The believer always thinks the problem is them. They think, "I'm too tired. I can't focus. My mind is weak. God feels far. I don't feel anything. I don't know what's wrong tonight." Nothing is wrong with them. The atmosphere is being controlled. She calls it spiritual humidity, a weight that makes prayer feel like pushing through mud. Witches use this law because it doesn't require confrontation. They don't need to attack the believer. They just need to adjust the air around them. And when the air is heavy, the spirit becomes quiet. The prayer becomes weak. The believer becomes discouraged. The law is simple. Change the room. And you change the prayer. Ilara says the most heartbreaking thing she ever witnessed was a woman who fought to pray for her family every night at midnight. Every night. Every night. Every night. And every night, the room shifted. The woman never knew why she felt drained, why her tongue felt heavy, why her knees trembled, why tears formed before she began to speak. But Ilara knew. She saw the atmosphere break the prayer, before the prayer ever broke the atmosphere. Years later, after escaping the occult, Ilara said something that stays with you. A discouraged believer is not weak. They're breathing in poisoned air, and she insists this second law is one of the most effective ways witches block midnight prayers. Not by fighting the believer, but by fighting the room. Ilara says the third spiritual law is the one most witches rely on, not because it's powerful on its own, but because it's predictable. She calls it the law of rhythmic interference. Not rhythm like music, not rhythm like chanting, but rhythm like breath, rhythm like heartbeat, rhythm like a prayer rising in steady waves. She learned this law during a ritual she wasn't prepared for, a night she remembers too clearly, too painfully, because it was the first time she understood just how fragile a prayer can be. It was nearly 12:30 a.m. The room was dim, lit only by the faint ember of a candle that had nearly burned out. The shadows were long. The air was quiet. Her mentor sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, breathing slowly. Not meditating, calibrating. Ilara watched her chest rise and fall in a slow rhythm, like waves tapping the shore with perfect timing. Then suddenly, without any warning, her mentor snapped her eyes open and whispered. She just started praying. Ilara didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Her mentor lifted her hand, and with a single movement, she matched the rhythm of the woman's prayer. How did she know the rhythm? How could she tell from miles away? Ilara still doesn't know. She still doesn't understand the mechanics of the law, but she remembers what it felt like. There was a pulse in the air, a spiritual heartbeat, rising from somewhere far away, a woman praying with intensity, a woman whose words were full of fire, full of desperation. Her prayer rose with strength, like waves building in a storm. And then her mentor began interfering. She didn't speak. She didn't chant. She didn't perform any ritual. She simply tapped her finger on the floor. Once, twice, 3 times. But the taps weren't random. They perfectly matched the woman's prayer rhythm, then shifted slightly, just slightly offbeat. The effect was immediate. Ilara gasped. The woman's spiritual rhythm, that rising heartbeat of prayer, hit an unseen wall. It stuttered, slowed, collapsed inward. Ilara felt it as if someone had grabbed the prayer midair and twisted it out of position. Her mentor whispered, "Every prayer has a rhythm. Match it, and you can break it." And then she continued, "When a believer's spirit rises, I pull it down. When they breathe strength, I breathe confusion. When they hit their peak, I hit their foundation." Ilara realized the horrifying truth. Witches don't fight the prayer head-on. They fight the timing of the prayer. A believer prays, "Our Father in Heaven." The witch counters, a pulse of interference. The believer prays, "I break every..." Another pulse. The believer prays, "Lord, deliver me." Another pulse. The prayer becomes unstable, like a song being interrupted by static. Ilara remembers the moment the woman's prayer broke completely. A sudden heaviness hit the air, like a rope snapping. She felt the woman's spirit falter, her voice waver, her words slow down, her passion drain away. And then, silence. Not because the woman stopped praying willingly, but because the spiritual rhythm had collapsed so violently that her mind suddenly felt blank, empty, like she forgot why she was praying. Ilara trembled. She felt the emptiness echo through her chest, as if someone had unplugged a light inside her. Her mentor didn't seem moved. She simply leaned back, closed her eyes, and whispered, "She won't try again tonight." That was the night Ilara learned what rhythmic interference truly was. Not breaking the prayer, breaking the flow of the prayer. Because prayer is not just words. It is momentum. It builds. It rises. It strengthens. It gathers force. And when witches disrupt the rhythm, even slightly, the prayer loses its climb. It becomes jagged, uneven, weak. Alara says the signs are easy to recognize. You start praying with fire and suddenly lose the passion. You start with clarity and suddenly forget what to say. You feel strong, then feel tired. You feel focused, then feel foggy. You feel bold, then feel doubtful. She says believers often blame themselves. I must be distracted. I must be tired. My faith must be low. But Alara shakes her head. No, your rhythm was being matched and broken. She insists this law works because the spirit responds to frequency, just like sound waves, just like ocean tides, just like the beating of a heart. Interrupt the rhythm, and you interrupt the power. Interrupt the power, and you interrupt the prayer. Interrupt the prayer, and you interrupt the breakthrough. Alara still remembers her mentor's final words that night. No matter how strong the believer, if you disrupt their rhythm, their prayer collapses, like a bird shot from the sky. And according to her, this law has stopped more midnight prayers than any attack believers can imagine. Alara says the fourth spiritual law is the one that haunted her long after she escaped witchcraft, not because it was powerful, but because it worked too easily. She calls it the law of spiritual substitution, and her voice lowers when she talks about it. Like someone speaking about a crime they can still feel guilty for. She explains it like this. People think their prayers are ignored. They think God didn't answer, but sometimes the wrong thing answers first. She remembers the night she learned this law. A night colder than usual. A night where the moon seemed too bright, as if watching everything with a single unblinking eye. Her mentor took her to a small clearing behind an abandoned warehouse. The floor was cracked. The air tasted metallic. The silence felt unnatural, like even the insects refused to live there. On the ground lay a circle made of ash, not drawn, placed perfectly, intentionally, with such precision that Alara felt like stepping. Inside would change something, fundamental in her soul. Her mentor didn't speak for a long time. She just looked at Alara with eyes too calm. Too cold? Too certain. Finally, she whispered, Tonight, you learn how to replace. Alara didn't understand. Replace what? Her mentor continued. When someone prays, they send out intention, emotion, fear, hope, a spiritual request, but requests can be intercepted. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. How? Her mentor knelt beside the ash circle and placed a small symbol inside it, a drawn sigil shaped like a broken loop. This, she said, is a substitute. Before Alara could speak, her mentor lifted her head suddenly, as if listening to something far away. She's praying now, she whispered. A mother asking for peace in her home. Then she placed her hand over the sigil and breathed, not forcefully, not dramatically, just a soft breath, barely a sigh. The circle reacted instantly. The ash trembled, just slightly, but enough for Alara to feel the air shift, enough for her to feel something being pulled toward the sigil, a prayer, someone else's prayer, and then something darker. Alara felt a flow, like a thread being redirected. The woman's real prayer had risen upward, but the answer was being pulled sideways, diverted, rerouted, hijacked. Her mentor stood up. The woman prayed for peace, she said calmly. But now, something else will enter her home. Alara felt her stomach twist. What will enter? She asked. Her mentor smiled faintly. Whatever this symbol calls. Alara felt sick. She asked, voice trembling. Why? Why would witches do this? Why not simply stop the prayer? Her mentor's answer chilled her to the bone. Because when a prayer is blocked, the believer tries again. But when the wrong answer arrives, they stop praying. Alara realized the horrifying truth. Spiritual substitution isn't about replacing God's answer. It's about replacing the believer's faith. She saw it happen countless times afterward. A woman prays for healing and instead receives emotional numbness. A man prays for guidance and receives confusion. A mother prays for her child's safety, and the child becomes more rebellious. A husband prays for peace in his home, and a sudden argument erupts that same night. A believer prays for clarity, and instead feels spiritually blind. Alara says the worst part is this. The substituted answer feels natural. It feels like life. It feels like coincidence, so the believer never realizes that the answer they received was not the answer they asked for. Ilara tells one story she never forgets. A young woman prayed every night, "Lord, send me someone who will love me." But her mentor placed a sigil of binding attachment and whispered into the night. A week later, the young woman met someone. A relationship that drained her, hurt her, isolated her, and nearly destroyed her. She thought it was God's answer, Ilara says softly. But it was our substitute. Ilara begins to shake when she recalls these moments. Not physically, but in her voice. Because she now knows how many people blamed God for answers he never sent. How many people walked away from faith, thinking heaven was silent, when in truth, their prayer was intercepted and replaced. She says, "The cruelest thing a witch can do is make a believer think God ignored them. This is the law she regrets the most, the law she wishes she had never learned, the law that damaged people the deepest." And she ends it with a line painful enough to echo long after her story stops. When the wrong answer enters their life, their prayer dies quietly. This, she says, is the fourth spiritual law, the one witches whisper about in the dark, because it gives them the most control. She says midnight is not just a time. Midnight is a doorway. It's the moment where one day dies and another is born. The single minute where yesterday and tomorrow touch each other in the dark. Witches believe those 60 seconds thin the veil between realms. Everything becomes sharper. Everything becomes lighter. Everything becomes easier to manipulate. She didn't understand this at first. She thought midnight prayer attacks were superstition, exaggeration, dramatic warnings. But then she lived it. Night after night, she felt something change exactly at 12, and not a second earlier, not a second later. She describes it like a click, like the air turning inside out. Sometimes the shadows would feel heavier, sometimes the air colder, sometimes her instincts sharper, sometimes her emotion gone completely numb. Her mentor once told her, "Midnight is when the world sleeps, and the spiritual world wakes." At 12, belief rises, desperation rises, fear rises, hope rises, prayers rise. But so do the things that feed on them. People pray the hardest when they feel the weakest. People cry the loudest when the world is darkest. People open their soul the most when the silence is deepest. And because the soul is open, it is vulnerable. That's why witches strike at midnight. Not because they fear the light, but because they prefer the silence. Ilara remembers one night, when she felt the weight of all 4 laws unfold at once, a believer somewhere far away, crying out for a breakthrough, with every ounce of strength they had left. Ilara felt the prayer rising like a flame, strong, pure, desperate. But her mentor moved calmly, almost gently, as if performing a routine she had done 1,000 times, a whisper to hijack intention, a breath to poison the atmosphere, a rhythm tap to break the prayer's flow, a symbol placed to intercept the answer. All within minutes, all within silence, all while the believer had no idea they weren't fighting themselves. But something unseen, Ilara's stomach twisted, her breath tightened. That night she felt something she had never felt before. A pull inside her chest, a voice beneath her thoughts, a presence that wasn't hers, her second self. It was growing stronger. She knew if she stayed in this world any longer, she would stop existing in the way she once was. She would become something she couldn't recover from. Her escape did not begin with courage. It began with fear, raw, choking fear. The fear of losing herself completely. She remembers standing alone in a room, the same room where she had learned her first law. The lantern was dim, the window open, her heart pounding like a warning. For the first time, she whispered something not taught by her mentor, something from childhood, something she had forgotten how to believe. "God, if you're still there, help me." She expected punishment. She expected darkness to swallow her instantly. She expected the second self to rise and silence her. But nothing happened. Nothing at all. The silence was the first sign that something had shifted. She felt a strange calm fill the room. Not warmth, not light, just clarity, a thinning of the fog that had wrapped her mind for years. She grabbed everything connected to witchcraft, sigils, journals, pendants, herbs, and dropped them into a bag. With shaking hands, she threw them away in the middle of the night. But her freedom didn't begin when she threw the objects away. It began the moment the second self inside her finally loosened its grip. She describes it like exhaling, after holding your breath underwater for too long, like waking from a dream you didn't know you were trapped in, like stepping out of a room that had been shrinking all around you. She spent months recovering, nights trembling, days feeling empty, dreams filled with shadows she once welcomed, moments where she felt the four laws pulling her back, urging her to return. But she didn't. She kept fighting, kept praying, kept asking for help, even when she didn't understand how prayer worked anymore. Her voice would break when she said it. I didn't escape because I was strong. I escaped because for the first time, the darkness didn't answer. She now warns people not out of pride, but out of memory. Deep, painful, permanent memory. She knows midnight prayers can shake foundations. She knows believers can break atmospheres. She knows rhythm can be restored. She knows substitution can be reversed, because she escaped the system that tried to control all of it. And now, when someone asks her why their midnight prayer failed, why they felt tired, why their tongue felt heavy, why their mind felt blocked, why their answer never came, she always says the same haunting thing. You didn't lose. You were attacked. But now that you know the laws, you won't be attacked the same way again.